Hello friends and welcome back to another video. Today's video is going to be the end of the decade book tag. So somebody commented on my recent video suggesting this tag. I will link their channel here. It was Bivens Reads who suggested this tag and I checked the tag out. The original creator of the tag is Brews and Reviews and I thought the tag was really fun and interesting, so I've decided to do it. Kat, the original creator of this tag, decided to split the decade into 3 sections from 2010 to 2013, from 2014 to 2016, and the last portion would be 2017 to 2019. And then you have to answer the following questions for each section. So the first question was, how much did you read? Now, I had a hard time finding answers to these questions because I do not have a good recall about my reading habits from the past. But thank God for Goodreads, I could just check out my stats because I joined Goodreads in November 2010. So from 2010 to 2013, I read 198 books. This was the time I was in my college, so I had done reading Harry Potter and I was curious to find out more books which would be similar to the ones I liked. The second question is, what genre did you read the most? So I was reading romance, fiction, contemporary fiction, young adult, and fantasy. I was reading Dan Brown, so that comes under, I don't know, thrillers or suspense. So I was reading all over the place, but just a little bit of classics were in there. Like I read Pride and Prejudice, Great Expectations, Persuasion, Wuthering Heights. These were a couple of classics which I read during this time. What were your favorite books and authors? So I was loving Nora Roberts. She wrote a lot of romance and fiction. I also loved reading Judith McNaught. I wasn't a huge fan of the Twilight series, but I did enjoy reading Meg Cabot a lot. So I loved The Princess Diaries and all the other books by her. I think I read all the books she ever wrote. I also really enjoyed reading Dan Brown. Is there a book you wish you had read during this time period? After I finished reading Pride and Prejudice and Persuasion, I was looking for other classics similar to this, but I couldn't find them. And I wish I had read North and South back then. Do you have any regrets about your reading during this time period? So the one regret I have is reading a lot of Nora Roberts because it was a safe zone for me. I knew she wrote well. I knew she had happy endings in her books. But once you have read 150 books by the same author, I think it's time to move on to something new, because otherwise you're going to stay stuck to one type or genre of books only. So the second section is from 2014 to 2016. This was the time I got iBooks. I got my Kindle maybe a couple of years back, but I was not able to buy any books because the Kindle books were not available in Pakistan. When I got the iBooks, I was very excited because they had free books. This was the time where I made a lot of wrong decisions about reading. I did not go and buy any books which I wanted to read. Instead, I just downloaded the free books I got from iBooks. I read 149 books during these 3 years, but I gave 1-star rating to the most of them. What genre did you read the most? So I was reading a lot of contemporary romance and chick lit. I'm just going through my Goodreads to see what I was reading. I was reading Nicholas Sparks and I read John Green. Nora Roberts is making a comeback. I just read some horrible books which I've given 1 star, 1 star, 1 star, 1 star to like 10 books in a row, because these were all free books which I read on iBooks, which I hated, but I just read them because they were for free. What were your favorite books and authors during this time? Stardust by Neil Gaiman, Divergent by Veronica Roth, The Selection by Kiera Cass. I wish I had read other books in this series. I just read this one. I read Starter for 10 by David Nichols, which I really enjoyed. I read The Wandering Falcon by Jamil Ahmed. That was fun. Is there a book you wish you had read during this time period? I did not read a single classic during this time period, even though I downloaded all of them because they were available on iBooks and on Kindle, and I could just find them everywhere. But I did not read any. So I wish I had read at least one classic. Do you have any regrets about your reading during this time period? Well, I wish I wasn't reading free books off of iBooks because they were not the kind of books I should have read. The only reason I was reading them, even though I knew they were crap, were because they were free. So the last section is from 2017 to 2019. I read a total of 113 books during these 3 years, and comparing them to the last two sections, this was a bit less, but this was good literature, people. So I'm happy about my reading during this time. What genre did you read the most? I read a lot of classics. Victorian literature to be specific, but there were books other than Viclit which I read as well. What were your favorite books and authors? My favorite book was Middlemarch by George Eliot. I loved reading Thomas Hardy. I enjoyed Far from the Madding Crowd a lot. I loved reading North and South. I loved reading Wives and Daughters. I loved reading Charles Dickens, so I loved Little Dorrit, Bleak House, Hard Times. I just found so many new authors and such different types of writing that I was blown away. Is there a book you wish you had read during this time period? There's no specific book I wish I had read. I wish I had read more books during this last year, but other than that, I was pretty happy with my reading. Do you have any regrets about your reading during this time period? I wouldn't say it's a regret, but I want to read other than classics as well. I just don't want to be sucked into one genre again and then 5 years later realize I should have read more non-fiction or more contemporary literature. So I feel like classics were the only thing I read. Maybe I'll try to read something other than a classic next. Do you have any regrets about your reading during this time period? No, I was very happy I got into classics because they just give you better perspective of life, and you don't usually get that with YA and fantasy. So I really enjoyed this time, so I have no regrets. At the end of the challenge, Brews and Reviews also has 2 general questions. The first one is, when did you find BookTube and did it change your reading habits? Yes. So I found BookTube, I think, in 2016. The only YouTuber or booktuber I was following was Ariel Bissett, but she was reading books which I wasn't very fond of. Ariel loves George Orwell, and she talked about Animal Farm and 1984 all the time. So I picked up those books because of her suggestion, and when I was looking up reviews for them, I found out a lot of other channels, and these channels were reading classics. So that's how I found out all these amazing channels on BookTube which loved to read classics, and they inspired me to pick up one book after another. And I'm so happy that I found their channels because I wouldn't be reading all this much if it wasn't for them. How do you think your reading has changed over the last decade? I think it has changed so much. I think I have read young adult and dystopian, and then I read romance and contemporary fiction. There was a lot of fantasy. It has been a journey, and I wouldn't have been here if I hadn't gone through all those phases. I really enjoyed doing this tag because it just reminded me how much I have achieved with my reading during this decade. Let me know down in the comments if you have any more fun suggestions. I will see you all in my next video, and have a happy new year.